Hey, welcome to another episode of the Never Lose a Deal podcast. Your My name is Lorillia Brown-Phillips. I am your host and welcome to another episode. So today I am talking about the US tariffs and the housing market. Could US tariffs affect the housing market? Now, unless you've been under a rock, this has been a very popular topic. And I kind of just want to just preference it in terms of how this could affect the real estate market as a whole. But before I go into today's episode, I always like to share who is this podcast for. So the Never Lose a Deal podcast is for real estate investors who who are interested in learning ways that they can creatively um, leverage other forms of financing and expand their real estate portfolio. So, going back to today's topic, I'm not going to hold you today, but let's kind of do a debrief on what tariffs are. So, to not go into a whole big old economics lesson, pretty much, the abbreviated version is tariffs are costs that are incurred by the companies that import any type of products into the US. So, and when we talk about housing, one of the main commodities when it comes to housing is lumber. And so much of our lumber in the US does come from Canada. So, what does that mean? Companies here in the US that import lumber into the US, whether it's from Canada or any other country, the US company is going to pay the cost. Now, of course, the cost for the US based company goes up, and now that cost is passed on to the purchaser who would buy that lumber. So the purchaser would be home builders or what have you, or construction companies, or home builders or what have you. So, with that being said, I thought I would share some insight of because I did a little research to see what are the individuals who have a mainstay in the space of home building, construction, lumber, or what have you, because lumber being one of the main sources and commodities when it comes to building homes. And so I came across an article from NAHB. I should, you know what? Let me share it with you, and we all can kind of look at this together. So, if you see my screen, you can see how tariffs impact the home building industry. Now, once again, this is NAHB, the National Association of Home Builders. Like I said, of course, there are lots of other industries that could affect real estate, but one is when it comes to building homes. And so that's why I said, you know what, this would be a great article. So pretty much, the abbreviated version of this article is that as of the date that I do this video, lumber is an item that has been exempt from the tariffs list. So right now, U.S. companies that do import lumber here in the U.S. from Canada are not being penalized. So that is good. But this article really goes into what could possibly happen, because we know that every day things are changing in the space of economics here in the U.S. As you can see, import on tariffs on building materials. The article goes into these as well, but it kind of talks about the indirect cost. Indirect costs are some of the other costs that we would be associated with a home builder. Indirect costs being the appliances that are put into the home that's being built. But one of the things that I do want to point out is that um the NA, what is it, the NAHB, what they are doing is that they are keeping a watch on this whole tariff situation, and they have been very um I want to say very involved with I guess their lobbyists and the people that they have who represent them to work with the US government so these things do not happen. I mean, that doesn't have not happen, but they does have a very negative effect on the building industry here in the US because of course people need a place to live. And so I'm just going to come back to the podcast. But like I said, um, it is open for you to do research yourself. So keep in mind, going back to what I'm talking about today, could U.S. tariffs affect the housing market? So, one being lumber. Right now, lumber is exempt from the list of items that would have a tariff. But as you know, I shared with you, National Association of Home Builders is a organization that is proactively looking to stay in communication with the government to be able to be a voice for the builders here in the US that they don't get affected. But one thing that the article did point out is that and I understand, with this podcast, there's going to be listeners and there's going to be people who watch the video. So for those who are listening, I shared the article about the tariffs from the National Association of Home Builders. And so, and then of course, for the viewing audience here on YouTube and Spotify, you all saw that I had, shared the article. Of course, do a Google search and you'll find it yourself and you can read the article yourself. But the article does point out that there are indirect things that will affect the home builders, because as a builder build a home, there are things that directly could affect the costs that are put in place for builders. So now, of course, as home building prices could possibly go up, those costs begin to be trickled down. And I think that is the reason why the whole tariffs thing is the economic boogeyman that many people fear. Those who do have somewhat of an understanding of it, is that the cost get passed down to the consumer. Because as I mentioned to you, if a tariff is put in the country on a certain particular item, a company who um, imports those items into the US, they pay a higher cost for the tariff. Now, of course, no company wants to absorb that cost. They have to pass it on down. So, who are they going to pass it down to? They're going to pass it down to the builders that buy materials from the companies that imported the materials. Now, the builder is going to pass that cost down to the person who is buying the home. So now the builder has to pay more to build their homes. They're going to pass that cost on to the buyer of the home. Now they're paying more for a house being built. And then this is where the fear mongering comes from. If there is little supply with building homes, because now builders know that the cost of the homes are higher, now the supply is smaller, and now there are less people to buy. And of course, a lot of those less people to buy are also people who may have gotten affected by losing their home. So it's a lot of fear mongering. But I always like to look at things as the lighter side. Like how can we find the silver lining in all this, that we don't have to come from a place of being very fearful? Well, right now, lumber isn't being affected. And that is one of the main materials when it comes to rehabbing homes, when it comes to building a home or what have you, is lumber. Right now, lumber is off the table. Now, of course, we don't know what may happen in the future, but right now, lumber is off the table. So, with that being said, how does this affect me? Like, doing this, every day working with investors. Now, do I rehab homes? No. But one thing I do is I do the financing side of it. I do assist with helping real estate investors get financing to rehab their homes, to be able to rehab an investment property, to be able to participate in new construction. And right now, rates are good. Rates are holding steady. Nothing has been shaken up to the point that things aren't, happening in the market here in New Jersey, where I work with a lot of investors um, in this space. But I will say this: there are pockets of the country where things may be slow. But one thing that I know, and I did some other videos, primarily little clips and shorts about the US, the New Jersey, Northeast, should I say Northeast market is holding steady. New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. We're holding steady in terms of when it comes to housing. We haven't got a big hit. I know places like Florida are seeing some big flips with their housing market. Of course, we know what's going on in California. I won't be surprised places in the Midwest like Kentucky, they've had those bad torrential rains last week. So, we're dealing with mother nature and natural disasters. Those are things you cannot control. But here in the Northeast, I mean, of course, we are technically in spring, but we're still getting winter weather. And so my thing is this: how can you, once again, looking at this, the silver lining in all this, how can you, as a business owner, if you're in the real estate industry, you're rehabbing homes, you're doing new construction, you are involved in the industry, you could even be an agent, because as I mentioned to you, it continues to trickle down. Lumber company buys lumber from out of the country, has to pay for the imported cost for it to come in. As I mentioned to you, lumber is off the tables, not an item being tariff, but if it does, they have to pass that cost on. So they absorb the cost to be able to import the item. They pass that cost down to the builder. The builder has to absorb that cost, so they're going to pass that cost down to the person who is looking to buy that home, and then it just trickles down and trickles down and trickles down. So with that being said, like I said, lumber is not being affected. Now I did come across another article in as I wrap this up. Um, and this was an article, three ways tariffs could affect the housing market. Because, like I said, right now it's not directly affecting it. These are just things that people are saying what could possibly happen. And the reason why is because I think many people are taking lessons of what happened during COVID. A lot, it was a big shakeup. With housing costs when COVID happened. That was during the time when there were direct building costs that did go up during COVID. But one article that I came across in Investopedia, it said, raw materials such as lumber, stone, and copper could cost more, making new homes more expensive. Right now, that's not the case. Renovators could also face high prices as tariffs will likely increase the cost of appliances, fixtures, cabinetry, and glass. And then also tariffs could stand to affect the already expensive housing market in different ways. So once again, these are just some of the things of what possibly could happen if the policies in regards to tariffs do change. But as of right now, these things aren't directly affecting us. And as I mentioned to you, uh, every industry will get affected. Tariffs could have a variety of effects on buyers, sellers, builders, and mortgage brokers. But as I mentioned to you, with someone who is in this space every day, I'm not really seeing a big change in things. But not to say things won't change, but right now they're not. Home renovators would also feel the pinch of tariffs, but once again, it's not happening right now. And so this article just really went into what could possibly happen, the same way I'm approaching this podcast episode. What could possibly happen, and how could it affect the housing market? So it's pretty much, as a whole, is really looking at what are all the materials that encompass with building a home. And you think about all those raw materials, you think about where do they come from, and could those, and if those raw materials are imported into the US, how they can affect a person who does, who is building a home. But once again, things are holding steady, and I want to leave this podcast episode with saying, um, is there a lot of fear in the marketplace? Yes. But I'm also a big advocate of, you also have the ability to control your own economy. Because what happens is that if you spend a lot of time worrying about what could happen in an economy that you don't control, you can't control what the president's going to do. You can't control what's going to happen with these tariffs. You can't control how the cost could affect, your place in the real estate industry. You can't control any of that. I don't care how many articles you read, how many news outlets you listen to. You can't control it. And if you spend a lot of energy trying to control things you can't control, that leaves you very empty from being able to control the things you can control. And you can control what goes on in your own individual economy, whether it is your business, how it affects your home life, how it affects your personal life. Those are the things that you can control. So I would always instruct the person to really look at what it is that they do if they are involved in real estate, and what are the ways that they can control what they are currently doing without the outside effects of what's going on here in the marketplace. That's why when it comes to financing, now more than ever, and I say this so many times, and I've said this on other videos, um, every deal has different dynamics. I tell people all the time, no deal is the same. The financing could be different as well. And as you talk to different lenders, the financing that goes involved in those deals can also be different. So you want to stay away from people who want to give you cookie cutter information when it comes to the investing space. Remember, my podcast solely focuses on real estate investors who want to creatively find financing ways to be able to expand their portfolio to build wealth. So I'm not talking to the home buyer, the FHA home buyer, the first time home buyer. I'm talking to investors who do leverage forms of capital that is not very common to the regular person. And so with that being said, if you are that real estate investor and you are still actively doing deals, you want to look at some other things to consider besides just interest rate. You don't want to make all your decisions based on interest rate. You want to definitely look at what is your long-term plan with whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're doing fix to flips, or you're doing you're fixing and you're holding, or you're involved in new construction. What is really the whole future layout of what it is that you're doing now? More than ever, you want to really be able to look at, do a 3 to 5 year look to the future on what it is that you want to do, being able to control the things that you can control. Meaning that if you are to get into certain real estate transactions, what are all the things that you have to consider? And that's what I want to leave you with. So, as always, I just want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, which is Leverage Portfolio Capital. Leverage Portfolio Capital is a specialist in asset-based lending for real estate investors. To learn more about DSCR fix and flip loans, go to www.leverageportfoliocapital.com to learn more. You'll see the ticker that is going across the screen. So as always, see you in the next podcast episode, and let's just keep an eye on what's going on here in the market. Like I said, we cannot control what happens in the economy, but we can control our own personal economy. So it's just a matter of just being aware, but not being fearful. We want to be aware, but we don't want to be fearful. As always, this is Lorillia. See you in the next podcast.